The smell in that room was not of mold, even though it had been raining torrentially in Panama for 3 days straight. The smell was of sulfur, mixed with expensive cologne, a combination that makes the stomach turn. Dr. Elias Vane stopped at the door before entering. He looked at the two-way mirror on the side wall. On the other side, he knew 3 generals and 2 CIA agents were watching his every move. His blood pressure was 160 over 100. He could feel the pulse in his neck. 14/2023. The man sitting on the metal chair, handcuffed to the table, did not look like a sorcerer. He wore no robes, no bone necklaces. He looked like an accountant, a bored bureaucrat, wearing an impeccable white dress shirt, without a single drop of sweat, despite the 95-degree Fahrenheit heat inside that windowless, safe house. That is what scared Dr. Vane the most, the normality of evil. Can you imagine that? Expecting a monster and finding a gentleman who could be your neighbor. Dr. Vane pulled out the chair and sat down. The noise of the metal legs dragging on the linoleum floor sounded like a gunshot in that silence. The prisoner smiled. It was not a smile of defiance. It was a smile of pity. He looked at the psychiatrist and said in a soft, polite voice, "Did you bring the recorder? Great, because what is happening in his cell right now, your medicine will not be able to explain." Dr. Vane felt a chill, even while sweating. He knew who the prisoner was talking about. Everyone knew. The man who ruled Venezuela with an iron fist was, at that exact moment, tied to a military hospital bed, screaming things that would make a priest lose his faith. To understand why we are listening to this story, you need to understand who Dr. Elias Vane is. He is not a ghost hunter. He hates that esoteric nonsense. Elias is a 56-year-old forensic psychiatrist, a Yale graduate, a man of pure science. His specialty is dismantling liars. He spent his life interviewing serial killers, cartel bosses, and terrorists. His job is to look into the devil's eyes and say, "You are clinically insane, not special." He charges $5,000 a day for consulting, a high fee, but for intelligence agencies it is pocket change. They called him because they needed a quick diagnosis. The key witness, the man sitting at the table, known only as the Godfather, had turned himself in at the Colombian border. He brought with him state secrets and a promise that the president would not fall by a military coup, but by spiritual collapse. The routine in that safe house was brutal. Located in the old canal zone, it was a concrete bunker surrounded by jungle. The humidity was so high that papers became soggy in minutes. Elias just wanted to do the job. Apply the sanity test, prove that the Godfather was a delusional schizophrenic, and return to his air-conditioned apartment in Miami. He is a professional skeptic. To him, witchcraft is just a manipulation tool for ignorant people. But look at the irony of fate. The arrogance of science is always the first to fall when reality decides to break the rules. Elias entered that room armed with his DSM-5, the Manual of Psychiatric Diagnoses, and a Mont Blanc pen. He thought he was in control. Poor Elias. He had no idea he was walking into a slaughterhouse. The interrogation began with standard questions: name, age, political affiliation. The Godfather answered everything with irritating clarity. No stuttering, no nervous tics. His facial micro-expressions were neutral. Elias wrote in his notepad, "Subject lucid, oriented in time and space, high narcissism." It is what any doctor would write. We try to place labels to feel safe. But then, the Godfather put his hand in his pants pocket. The guards behind the two-way mirror must have unholstered their weapons. Elias recoiled, but the man pulled out only a small black notebook. The leather had a strange, porous texture, resembling the skin of an orange dried in the sun. He slid the notebook across the table to Elias. "Open to the marked page," said the Godfather. Elias, driven by that morbid curiosity we all have, opened it. There were no nuclear codes there. There were no Swiss bank accounts. There were dates, an endless list of dates and names written in a dark brown ink that, Elias realized with disgust, was not ink. It was oxidized blood. Next to each name, there was a description of the payment. Things like, "1 eye for 5 years of stability," or "the silence of mothers for protection against betrayal." "This is folklore," Elias said, closing the notebook forcefully. He tried to sound authoritative. "This has no legal value." The Godfather laughed. It was a dry laugh. "Legal? Doctor, the man you arrested, He is not screaming because he lost power. He is screaming because the contract expired yesterday at midnight, and the collecting entity does not accept habeas corpus. The temperature in the room seemed to have dropped 10 degrees. Elias looked at the air conditioner. It was off. The sensation of physical discomfort was real. He felt a sharp pain behind his eyes. His rationality was being attacked not by arguments, but by the atmosphere. That was not a delusion. It was a confession of debt. Elias asked for a break. He needed water. He needed to get out of that room. He went to the anteroom where the CIA agents were. The room was full of monitors, cold coffee, and cigarette smoke. "Did you hear that?" Elias asked, pointing. "To the glass. He is playing with us. It is theater." The senior agent, a man named Miller, did not look at Elias. He was focused on a side screen showing a live video feed from another location, probably from the prison where the president was held. The image was grainy in black and white. "Doctor," Miller said, his voice tired. "Look at this." Elias approached the screen. The image showed a maximum security padded cell. In the center, there was a figure curled up on the floor, in a fetal position. The president, the man who challenged empires. He was shaking violently. "Is he in withdrawal?" Elias asked. "It is medical logic always trying to explain." "Toxicology screens came back negative," Miller replied. "But look at the floor." Elias squinted. The floor of the cell was covered in a dark puddle. It looked like motor oil. "He has been vomiting that for 6 hours," said Miller. "Doctors analyzed the substance. It is not bile. It is not blood. It is a mixture of earth, volcanic, ash, and decomposed human biological material." The silence in the control room was absolute. No one there knew what to do. They had the most wanted man in the hemisphere in custody, and he was expelling a graveyard from his mouth. The isolation of that situation is terrifying. Science failed. Politics failed. Only the leather notebook in the other room remained. Elias realized they did not call him to diagnose the Godfather. They called him because they were afraid. Elias returned to the interrogation room. He did not sit down. He stood, leaning against the wall, trying to keep his distance from that polite man. "What is happening to him?" Elias asked. His voice came out weaker than he would have liked. The Godfather crossed his hands on the table. Clean hands, manicured nails. "Power is not free, Doctor. Do you think he stayed there through charisma? Through luck? No. We made deals. Ancient deals." He began to describe the ritual. "I will not go into graphic details here, because frankly I want you to be able to sleep tonight. But it involved rituals performed in the mountains of Sorte in Venezuela, on specific dates. It involved the desecration of national heroes' graves to steal their aura. The problem," continued the Godfather, "is that he stopped paying. Arrogance blinded him. He thought he was greater than the entities that served him. He stopped the sacrifices." Elias felt his stomach turn. "So, he is dying." "Worse," said the Godfather. "He is being hollowed out. The thing that lived inside him all this time, the thing that gave him that inexhaustible energy to speak for hours on TV, it wants out, and it will tear its way out." At that moment, Elias noticed something on the Godfather's hands. Red marks began to appear on his wrists, as if invisible ropes were being tightened. Stigmata. "See?" The sorcerer raised his wrists. "I was the guarantor. They are collecting the interest from me, too." It was not an illusionist's trick. The skin was breaking on its own. Drops of real blood dripped onto the white table. Elias backed away until his back hit the door. Medicine does not explain spontaneous lacerations. Physics does not explain this. The room shook. It was not an earthquake. It was a subtle, deep vibration that made Elias's teeth chatter. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling began to buzz loudly, that electric sound of a giant insect. "He is trying to negotiate now," said the Godfather, looking at the ceiling, as if he could see through the concrete miles away. "He is offering his wife's soul, his son's soul, but they do not want promises anymore. They want flesh." Elias felt pressure in his ears, similar to descending in a plane too quickly. His nose began to bleed. A red drop fell onto his starched white shirt. The body reacts to the presence of the unnatural. It is a survival instinct. It is your DNA screaming for you to run. The Godfather began to whisper a prayer. It was not Latin. It was not Spanish. It was a language full of hard consonants, guttural sounds. "Stop that!" yelled Elias. Panic took over. The facade of the man of science crumbled. He was just a scared primate in the dark. Outside, the tropical storm worsened. Thunder shook the structure. It seemed nature was reacting to what was happening in the president's cell and in that interrogation room. There is a connection, do you believe? The physical environment responding to spiritual chaos. Elias looked at the two-way mirror. He saw, for a brief second, the Godfather's reflection. But in the reflection, the man was not sitting. In the reflection, there was a tall, formless shadow standing behind the empty chair. Elias blinked, and the image returned to normal. But he knew what he had seen. His sanity was hanging by a thread. The room door opened abruptly. Agent Miller entered, pale as wax. He ignored protocol. He ignored Elias. He went straight to the Godfather. His heart stopped. 3 minutes. They revived him, but Miller paused, swallowing hard. He woke up different. The Godfather smiled sadly. "It is not him who woke up, Agent Miller. The tenant has taken over the house." Miller threw a tablet on the table. A new video. The president was standing in the cell. He had ripped the leather restraints with brute force. The strength of 10 men, his eyes. My God, the eyes were totally black. No sclera, no iris. Pits of tar. He looked directly at the security camera, and he smiled. A smile too wide for a human face, tearing the corners of his mouth. Elias looked at the screen. He saw that. There was no diagnosis in the DSM-5 for complete demonic possession. "What do we do?" asked Miller to the sorcerer. See the irony. The CIA asking a warlock for tactical advice. "You do nothing," replied the Godfather. "You just lock the door and throw away the key. What is in there will consume itself. It will eat its own body until nothing is left. That is how it ends. Not with a court, but with a banquet." The scream that came from the tablet was so high-pitched that the microphone distorted. Elias covered his ears. The president began to bash his head against the cell wall, rhythmically. Thump, thump, thump. It was not despair. It was dedication. He was trying to crack his own skull open. Elias felt he was going to vomit. He ran to the door. He needed to get out of there. The truth was toxic. Dr. Elias Vane signed the most restrictive non-disclosure agreement the U.S. government possesses. If he speaks a word about this, he goes to prison for life for treason. He returned to Miami. He continues to see patients, but he changed. He sleeps with the lights on. He stopped drinking, but started praying, and he never accepted government work again. The Godfather disappeared into the witness protection program. They say he lives in a small town in Montana, raising horses, but I doubt he has peace. As for the president, well, official news says he is awaiting trial, receiving medical treatment. Lies. He was transferred to a naval black site, a floating cage in the middle of the ocean, far from dry land, far from anything he can hurt. They say that, on calm nights, the sailors guarding the location can hear the screams coming from the lower deck. Screams in 2 simultaneous voices, one asking for forgiveness and the other asking for more. I ask you, is it worth it? All that power, all that money, to end up as a meat puppet in a dark cell? Look at world leaders. Today, look closely into their eyes on TV. How many of them do you think have already signed the leather notebook? Write in the comments, where are you watching this dossier from? Comment your city and country, and if you see someone in power with that empty look, run. The bill always comes due.